The sign was written in 3 languages. The handwriting was uneven, the letters slightly too large, like someone had practiced them many times before committing them to the board. It read, "For sale, good things, fair price." Behind the sign sat Rith. He was small even for a hatchling. His scales were pale silver, the color of old coins left out in the rain. His horns had barely started to grow, 2 tiny nubs above his brow ridge that he sometimes touched when he was nervous, which was often. He sat on an overturned crate, his tail curled around his feet, both hands resting flat on the table in front of him the way he had seen proper vendors do it. The table was narrow, the things on it were not many. A carved wooden dragon, no longer than a hand, painted blue with careful detail on every scale. A star map puzzle inside a clear case, missing 2 pieces but still beautiful. A frayed plush creature from some world Rith had never been able to identify, soft and shapeless from years of being held. And a small round orb that, when tapped, played 6 seconds of gentle music before going quiet again. Rith had owned these things for as long as he could remember. He did not want to sell them, but he had not eaten in 2 days, and the nutrient-paste vendor in Block C did not accept goodwill as payment. Duskport's lower market was loud and bright and smelled of fried protein and engine grease. Dozens of species moved through its corridors, hauling crates, arguing over prices, calling out to each other in voices that bounced off the low metal ceiling. Rith's corner was the cheapest section of the market, tucked between a broken coolant pipe and a vendor who sold replacement hull bolts. Not many people came this far down the row. The ones who did mostly walked past without looking. A few looked and then looked away faster, the way people do when they see something uncomfortable they do not want to think about. One group of Kelvari children pointed at him and laughed. Not mean laughter exactly, just the laughter of people who found something strange. A baby dragon sitting alone behind a table trying to sell his toys. It was, from a certain angle, absurd. Rith kept his hands flat on the table and his expression neutral. He had practiced that too. Around midday, a Kelvari merchant with a wide green face and small black eyes stopped at the table. He picked up the glowing orb and turned it over in his fingers. He tapped it. The music played. "How much?" the merchant asked. Rith had thought about this. He said a number. The merchant made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He offered less than half. Rith looked at the orb. He remembered the first time he had found it, wedged behind a ventilation panel in Corridor 7, when he was very small and very frightened, and the music had made the corridor feel less empty. He had kept it ever since. He said a lower number, still more than the merchant offered. They went back and forth 3 times. In the end, Rith accepted the merchant's price. It was not fair. He knew it was not fair, but fair was not something the lower market gave out freely, and his stomach had been hurting since yesterday morning. The merchant pocketed the orb and walked away without another word. Rith sat with the credits in his palm for a moment. Then he closed his hand around them and stood up. He left the carved dragon and the puzzle and the plush creature on the table. He could not afford to leave everything unattended for long and walked quickly to Block C. The paste vendor was a heavyset Tuvali woman with 4 arms and a permanent expression of mild irritation. She looked at Rith. She looked at the credits. She scooped one portion of nutrient paste into a container and held it out without speaking. Rith took it. He said thank you. She had already turned away. He ate in the maintenance corridor behind his table, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. The paste was grey and tasted of almost nothing, but it was warm and his stomach stopped hurting after a few minutes. He held the carved wooden dragon in his other hand while he ate. It was the one thing he had not put on the table today. He was not sure he could put it on the table. His mother had carried it. He did not remember her face. He did not remember her voice. He only knew she had existed because of the way crew members on the old freighter had talked about her in short, quiet sentences when they thought he was not listening. She had been strong, they said. She had been good at her job. She had not made it through the raid. Rith finished the paste. He set the empty container aside. He looked at the small carved dragon in his palm, blue paint, careful scales, a chip on the left wing where it had been dropped once. He put it in his pocket. Then he went back to his table, straightened the remaining items, and waited. He had 2 things left to sell. After that, he did not know what he would do. The station lights above the market buzzed softly. Somewhere far down the corridor, someone was playing music, not the gentle 6-second kind, but something louder and messier and alive. Rith listened to it and kept his hands flat on the table. He was open for business. The office of Warden Goss smelled like recycled air and old paperwork. Every surface was covered in data slates and printed forms and small notices that had been ignored long enough to become permanent fixtures. Goss herself was a Brellan, tall, thin, with a hard outer shell the color of dried mud and eyes that moved independently, one watching Rith while the other scanned a screen. Rith had waited 40 minutes to be seen. He had prepared what he wanted to say. He had a list, mental, organized. He knew what he needed, a vendor registration permit, Class D, for non-sponsored sapients under 3 meters. He had looked it up on a public terminal in Corridor 12. He met every listed requirement. He said this clearly when Goss finally waved him to the chair in front of her desk. She did not look surprised. She also did not look interested. She pulled up his station record. She read something. She set the slate down. Dragon, subadult, unsponsored, she said. Classification, Tier 3 volatile species, permit denied. Rith asked why. She explained. 41 years ago, a dragon named Vayak the Ash-Crowned, an adult male with a documented temper, had destroyed Docking Bay 14 during a dispute over cargo fees. 3 ships were damaged. Repair costs had been enormous. Following the incident, the Duskport Charter had added a clause. No unsponsored dragon of any age was permitted to hold commercial permits, sign contracts, or establish permanent residence on the station. Rith pointed out carefully that he was not Vayak the Ash-Crowned. He was also not an adult. He was not even half a meter tall. Goss said the charter did not make those distinctions. Rith said that seemed like a problem with the charter. Goss said she did not write the charter. She only enforced it. He had 7 days to produce a licensed sponsor or vacate his vending spot. After that, station security would remove him from the lower market. He asked where he was supposed to go. She was already looking at the next form. Rith walked back through the administrative corridor and into the main market flow. He kept his pace even. He did not let his scales bristle. He had learned early that showing distress in public was a way of inviting people to decide things for you, and he preferred to decide things himself. He was not very good at it yet, but he was learning. He passed a stall selling warm drinks. A small Tuvali girl with blue skin and 4 thin arms was sitting on the step below it, eating something wrapped in paper. She saw Rith and looked away quickly, then looked back. Her name was Sira. She had been working her family's stall in the lower market since she was old enough to make change. She and Rith had never had a real conversation, but sometimes, when Rith came back from somewhere and his table was empty, there would be a small piece of food left near the corner of it. No note, no explanation. He always pretended he had not noticed who left it. She always pretended she had not left it. It was the closest thing he had to a friendship on Duskport. Today she looked at him for a moment and then held out what she was eating, half of something dense and slightly sweet. He took it, he said thank you, she nodded and looked away. He sat behind his table and ate it slowly and thought about 7 days. At night, after the market lights dimmed, Rith lay in the maintenance corridor that had become his sleeping place. It was warm near the ventilation duct, and nobody came through after the second bell. He thought about his mother. He did not have many memories of her. He had been barely a month old when the freighter was attacked. What he had were not memories exactly, more like impressions. A large shape that was warm, a sound that was steady, the feeling of being held against something solid while the world moved fast and loud around him. After she died, the crew had not known what to do with him. They were a cargo crew. They were not equipped for hatchlings, especially dragon hatchlings. One of them had read somewhere that dragons were territorial and fire-capable and extremely difficult to rehome. None of that was true for a 1-month-old who had not yet developed any of those things, but people believed what they had read. They docked at Duskport for a routine stop. They left Rith in the lower market near a warming vent with a sack of dried food, a note that said found, needs home, and 4 items that had apparently belonged to his mother: the carved dragon, the puzzle, the plush creature, the orb. They said they would come back. He had been 9 months old. He had not understood that coming back was something people sometimes said without meaning. He understood it now. He was nearly 3 years old. He had taught himself language from listening. He had learned numbers from watching transactions. He had learned that adults who asked too many questions were usually about to take something away. He looked at the 2 remaining items on his table in the dim light: the puzzle, the plush creature. He had 7 days. He put the plush creature in his pocket next to the carved dragon. He would sell the puzzle tomorrow. He pulled his tail close and closed his eyes and listened to the station hum around him, steady and indifferent, like breathing. He almost did not stop. Dale Corvin moved through the lower market the way he moved through most places, directly, without pausing, with a list in his head and no interest in deviation. He needed coolant sealant, a replacement pressure gauge, and 2 weeks of ration packs. Duskport was a supply stop, nothing more. He had a contract posting waiting on an outer colony, a cargo berth booked, and no particular reason to linger. He was halfway past Rith's table when the puzzle caught his eye. He stopped. It was the region on the map. He recognized it immediately: the Veth corridor, a narrow transit lane between the Kelvari Reach and the outer colonies. He had spent 6 years working structural contracts out there. He knew those star positions the way some people knew their own street. He looked at the puzzle more carefully. It was a quality piece, old but well-made, the kind of thing that cost real money when it was new. Then he looked at who was selling it. The creature behind the table was very small, silver-scaled, with the beginning of horn nubs and a tail that was curled tight, which Dale recognized, even across species, as the posture of something trying to look bigger than it felt. Both hands were flat on the table. The eyes were watching him with careful, measured attention. "This is a good puzzle," Dale said. "Yes," said Rith. "How much?" Rith said a number. It was low. Dale looked at the puzzle again, then at the table. There was not much else on it, just one more item, a worn plush creature that had clearly been handled many times. No food, no drink, no backup stock, just 2 things and a sign that had been written with some effort. "How long have you had this?" Dale asked, meaning the puzzle. "Long time," Rith said. He watched Dale carefully to see where this was going. Adults asked questions for reasons. Usually the reason was not good. "It's missing 2 pieces," Dale said. "Yes, I know which ones. The 2 near the outer edge of the Veth sector. They are not important pieces. The picture is still clear." Dale almost smiled at that. He looked at the price again. "You've underpriced this," he said. Rith blinked. "What?" "The price you named, it's too low. This puzzle is worth more than that. The map detail alone, this is a cartography series from at least 30 years ago. They don't print these anymore." Rith was quiet for a moment. "Most people try to pay less," he said, "not more. Most people are taking advantage of the fact that you don't know what it's worth yet," Dale said, not unkindly. He said the fair number. It was nearly double what Rith had asked. Rith stared at him. Dale put the credits on the table, the fair number, not the low one. He picked up the puzzle. "Who is your guardian?" he asked. The careful look came back immediately. "I do not have one." "Who do you live with?" "I manage on my own." Dale looked at him steadily. He was not a man who got emotional easily. He had spent 20 years doing structural work in deep space, which required a certain kind of patience and a very clear eye for problems. He was looking at a very clear problem right now. "How old are you?" he asked. Nearly 3 years. In dragon years, that is. Young Rith said flatly. He had been asked this before in tones that were never kind. I know I am young, I am managing. I didn't say you weren't, Dale said. There was a pause. Somewhere down the corridor, a vendor was arguing with a customer about shipping weight. The station lights hummed. Do you have a registered berth? Dale asked. I have a spot in corridor 9, near the ventilation duct. It is warm and no one bothers me there. Dale was quiet for a moment. I see, he said. He did not say anything else right away. He just stood there holding the puzzle, thinking in the way that engineers think, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Rith watched him and tried to decide if this was the part where the adult decided he was someone's problem and went to find a warden. I'm going to resupply, Dale said finally. I'll come back this way. You don't have to, Rith said. It came out more defensive than he meant it. I know, Dale said. I'll come back anyway. He walked away down the corridor. Rith watched him go. He kept his expression neutral. He kept his hands flat on the table. He told himself it did not matter whether the human came back or not. Adults said things, then they did not come back. He knew this. He had learned this. But he stayed at his table later than usual that evening. He told himself it was because business was slow and the light was still good. He stayed until the second bell and then went to corridor 9 and lay down near the ventilation duct and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Sira had left something near his table again, a small bread roll still warm. He had eaten it in 3 bites and not tasted any of it. He held the carved dragon in one hand and the plush creature in the other, and thought about a man who had paid more than he had to, and had said he would come back. He tried not to hope. He was not entirely successful. Dale did not sleep well. He had a small rented berth in Duskport's transit quarter, 200 square feet, a bunk, a desk, a terminal. He sat at the terminal for 3 hours after resupply and read through the Duskport station charter in full. It was not pleasant reading. The charter was dense and old and had been amended so many times in different directions that some of the clauses contradicted each other. But buried on page 47, in a section titled Exceptional Circumstances Provisions, was what he was looking for. A registered sponsorship bond, available to any station-standing citizen with a clean conduct record and sufficient financial surety. When filed, it transferred legal responsibility for an unsponsored sapient to the sponsoring party. It suspended any species-based permit restrictions for the duration of the bond. It had been written for rare cases. It was not used often, but it was there. Dale read it 4 times, then he went to sleep. In the morning, he went back to the lower market. Rith was already at his table. He had the plush creature set out, the last item besides the carved dragon, which Dale had noticed was never on the table. When he saw Dale coming, something moved across his face and then went carefully still. Dale sat down on the crate across from him, the same crate the merchant had probably never thought to use. He put his hands on his knees. I read your station charter last night, he said. Rith looked at him. Why? Because I wanted to know what the options were. Options for what? For fixing this, Dale said plainly. A long silence. Rith's tail moved once. There is a registered sponsorship bond, Dale continued. Page 47 of the charter. If I file it, your Tier 3 classification gets suspended. You can hold a vendor permit. You have legal status on the station. Security cannot remove you. Rith stared at him for a long moment. You read the charter, he said slowly. The whole charter. The relevant sections. Why would you do that? Dale looked at him directly. Because yesterday you tried to sell a puzzle worth 60 credits for 28. And I think you've been doing that with everything. Not because you don't understand value. Because you've learned to take whatever people offer you. Because nobody ever told you that you were allowed to ask for what things are actually worth. Rith was very still. I'm not asking for anything in return, Dale said. I want to be clear about that before you ask, because I can see you're about to. I was about to ask, Rith admitted quietly. I know the answer is nothing. I don't want your things. I don't want to own you or control where you go or use you for any purpose. I want to file a piece of paperwork so that a station law written about a completely different dragon 40 years ago stops being used to push a 3-year-old out of the only home he has. Rith looked down at the plush creature on the table. He touched one of its worn ears. Why, he asked, not aggressively, just honestly, the way a person asks when they have been told something that does not match any pattern they know. Dale thought about it. He was not a man who gave quick answers to questions that deserved real ones. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. I've been working contracts and moving between stations since then because it was easier than stopping. Yesterday I walked through this market with a list and know where I actually needed to be, and I walked past a kid selling his own toys to eat, and every single person around him was doing the same thing I almost did, which was keep walking. He paused. I'm not built for that. I found that out yesterday. Rith did not say anything for a while. Then he reached under the table and brought out the carved wooden dragon. He set it between them. He had never put it on the table before. This was my mother's, he said. She carried it. I don't remember her, but the crew told me. I have never sold it. Not when I was very hungry. Not when the warden told me I had 7 days. He looked at it. I think I kept it because it was the only thing that was definitely hers, that definitely connected me to someone who chose to have me. He looked up at Dale. I did not think there would be another person like that, he said, who chose. Dale looked at the small carved dragon on the table. He did not pick it up. It was not his to pick up. Let me file the paperwork, he said. After that, you decide everything else. Where you go, what you sell, what you keep. I'm not trying to take over. I'm trying to get you to a position where you have actual choices. Rith picked the carved dragon back up. He held it for a moment, then put it in his pocket. Okay, he said. Okay, Dale said. He stood up, and they walked together to the administrative quarter. And for the first time in a long time, Rith walked through the station beside someone instead of alone. He kept his hands in his pockets. His left hand was around the carved dragon. He held it the whole way there. Warden Goss had processed 11,000 forms in her 18 years at Duskport. She had never seen a registered sponsorship bond submitted in person, by hand, with every section completed correctly and every supporting document attached in the correct order. She read through it twice. She looked at Dale Corvin. He was sitting in the chair across from her desk with his hands on his knees, calm the way large objects are calm, not because nothing was happening, but because they were too solid to be moved by it. Rith sat beside him, tail wrapped around his feet, watching her with the careful attention of someone who had been in this office before and not enjoyed it. She had expected to find something wrong, a trafficking angle, a collector, someone using the bond mechanism for purposes it was not intended for. She had pulled Dale's station record while they were in the waiting area. It was clean, 20 years of contract work, deep space structural engineering, no violations, no flags. She asked him why he was doing this. He said because the kid needed a sponsor and he qualified. She asked what he expected to get out of it. He said he expected to get a confirmed filing receipt and a permit approval. She asked the question differently. What was his personal interest in the dragon? He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, my personal interest is that he's a child living in a maintenance corridor because your charter is 40 years out of date, and I had the means to do something about it, so I did. Goss looked at him. She approved the bond. She did not congratulate him, but she processed it at full speed, which she did not do for everyone, and she did not find a reason to delay it, which she could have. That evening, word had moved through the lower market the way words always move through small communities, sideways, in pieces, faster than it should. A human had filed a sponsorship bond for the Dragon Boy. The reactions varied. Boven, a broad Tuvali trader who had operated a dry goods stall 3 rows from Rith for the entire 2 years Rith had been on Duskport, heard the news from Sira's mother. He set down the crate he was carrying. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked the crate back up and went back to work, and his expression, for a moment, was the expression of someone doing arithmetic on something they did not enjoy thinking about. He had known Rith was there. He had never done anything. He told himself he had not known things were that bad. He told himself a lot of things. The next morning he walked to Rith's table, which now had a proper assigned spot in the middle of the market instead of the far corner, because Dale had arranged the transfer as part of the bond filing. Boven put his hands on the table and looked at Rith. "I'm glad someone did something," he said. It came out rough and brief, the way honest things sometimes do when they cost you something to say. Rith looked at him. "Thank you," he said. That was all. Boven walked back to his stall. They both let it be what it was. In the south corridor, near the food vendors, a group of regular market traders were having a different conversation. A Kelvari shipper named Dro, who had bought hull sealant from Rith twice and never asked his name, was explaining his theory to whoever would listen. Humans, Dro said, were like this sometimes. You could not predict it. Most species operated on reasonable self-interest. They calculated benefit. They weighed cost. Then there were humans who would sometimes look at a situation, decide that something was wrong, and simply begin fixing it without any apparent concern for what they were going to get back. Was it stupidity? His companion asked. Dro considered this seriously. No, he said finally, it was not stupidity. Stupid was not knowing better. Humans usually knew exactly what they were doing. They just seemed to have a threshold, some kind of internal point, past which they stopped calculating and simply acted. It was, he said, the most alarming thing about them. Meanwhile, Dale was teaching Rith how to price things. They sat at the table together in the evenings after the market traffic slowed. Dale would pick up an item, something from Rith's small remaining inventory or something hypothetical, and ask Rith what he thought it was worth. Then he would explain how to think about it: material cost, rarity, demand, condition, what someone needs versus what they want, how to read a buyer's first offer. Rith was a fast learner. He asked good questions. Dale answered them without shortening them. One evening, Rith pulled out the plush creature. He had taken it off the table days ago and not put it back. "I found a second one," he said, "a long time ago, behind a panel in corridor 4, same kind. I kept both." He turned it over in his hands. "I do not need 2 anymore." He looked at Dale. "I want to sell this one. I want to use the credits to buy you a meal. A real one, not paste." Dale looked at the plush creature, then at Rith. "All right," he said. They ate at a proper vendor stall, hot food, 2 portions, a table with actual chairs. Rith ate everything on his plate and then looked at his own hands for a moment, like he was checking that they were still his. It was the first meal he had shared with someone in 3 years. It tasted completely different from every meal he had eaten alone. He did not say this out loud, but Dale seemed to understand it anyway. Neither of them mentioned it. That was also, somehow, exactly right. Dale's resupply stop had been scheduled for 4 days. He had been on Duskport for 3 weeks. He made the call to his employer on a Tuesday, standing in his rented berth with the terminal on the desk and the door closed. His employer was a Helvorian project manager named Brott, efficient, practical, not given to unnecessary conversation. Dale explained that he needed to push his start date back by an additional 2 weeks. He gave no details. Brott said, "Your on-site record is good. 2 weeks is acceptable. Do not make it 3. Dale said he would not make it 3. He closed the terminal and sat on the bunk for a moment. Then he pulled out his own personal data slate and started making notes. The colony posting was on a station called Orven 6. Permanent structure, unlike Duskport's transient population. A residential quarter, designated learning terminals for young sapients. The colony had families, had children, had the kind of infrastructure that came with people who intended to stay somewhere. He had a private room contracted as part of the work package. It was not large, but it had a second bunk that was currently being used as storage. He cleared the storage in his notes. He wrote down some other things, then he went to the lower market. Rith was packing up for the day, moving his small inventory into the locked box Dale had helped him arrange with the market administration. He had 3 items left to sell, 2 pieces of carved stonework he had acquired through a trade with another vendor, and the star map puzzle. He stopped when he saw Dale's expression. "You're leaving," Rith said. He kept his voice even. He had known this was coming. Dale had a contract. Dale had a life. This had always been temporary. "Soon, yes," Dale said. "I want to talk to you first." They sat on the crates in the quiet of the winding down market. The light was doing what it always did at this hour, going amber and soft, making even the metal walls look warmer than they were. Dale said it plainly. The way Rith had come to understand was simply how Dale said most things. The colony had a room, it had a learning terminal, it had families, which meant it had resources for young sapients, teachers, medics, people who knew how to do this. It was not exciting, it was not a rescue ship or a grand adventure. It was a working colony on the edge of occupied space, and it was stable, and it had room for one more. Rith was very still. "What would I be," he asked, "in this arrangement?" Dale thought about it. He was quiet long enough that Rith knew he was actually thinking, not just choosing a comfortable answer. "Whatever you want to call it," Dale said. "I'm not going to put a name on it that you haven't chosen. But if you're asking what I think is happening, I'm asking a kid if he wants to come home." Rith looked at the locked inventory box. He looked at the market around him, the stalls and the corridors and the amber light on the metal ceiling. He had been here for nearly 3 years. He knew every crack in every wall. He knew which vendors were fair and which ones would try to shortchange him. He knew where it was warm at night and where the food vendors left their unsold stock. He knew this place the way you know somewhere you survived, not the way you know somewhere you lived. He reached into his pocket. He took out the carved wooden dragon. He held it in both hands and looked at it for a long moment. Blue paint, careful scales, a chip on the left wing. His mother had carried this. He had kept it through everything. He had never sold it even when his stomach hurt and the credits would have helped, and it was the only thing of value he had left. He had kept it because it was proof that someone had chosen him once. He put it in his pack. "Okay," he said. Dale nodded. "Okay." They left Duskport on a grey morning when the station lights were just shifting from night cycle to day. The docking corridor was quiet except for the hum of engines warming up and the distant sound of cargo being shifted somewhere deeper in the bay. Boven was at his stall when they passed. He raised one hand. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Sierra was near the food vendors. She waved with 2 of her 4 arms. Rith waved back. He would not see her again, probably. That was a fact he let himself feel for a moment and then carried with him, small and real, alongside the other things he was bringing. Dale's ship was a mid-class cargo runner, not large, not new, but solid, which was the word that fit Dale in general. It smelled of metal and engine oil and faintly of the ration packs stacked in the rear compartment. Rith climbed into the co-pilot seat, not because he knew how to fly, because the view screen was largest there. Dale started the engine sequence. Duskport fell away below them, then behind them, then became one light among many. Dale reached behind his seat and put the star map puzzle on the console between them. Rith looked at it. He opened the case. He began laying out the pieces. After a moment, Dale reached over and placed one, a piece near the outer edge of the Veth sector, close to where the 2 missing ones had been. Rith placed another. Outside the view screen, space spread out in every direction, quiet and enormous and full of distance. They worked on the puzzle together as the ship moved through it. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They did not need to. There was a place they were going, and it was waiting for them, and they were on their way. That was enough. That was more than enough.